Hi everybody. I'm sorry I wasn't there today, but I wanted to show you guys how to split up your code in a way and how to mark up your code in a way that might be helpful to you and your partner, since two of you folks are going to be working on the same code. The first thing to do is name your classes in a good way. Be consistent with your sizing of objects and type especially. Comment your code and split up your CSS into multiple files. So we'll go by each one of those step by step. So one thing that is really helpful is whenever you're coming up with your class names, call them something that if you handed this off to anybody, they could look through your code and say, oh, I know what that is. So class of logo rather than class of div1 or div2 or div3 or div4. When somebody else who hasn't coded this thing is going to look at this thing and say, hey, what's div1, div2, 3, and 4? Nobody's going to know. And even you, after 6 months, if you had to come back to this after a while, you'd never remember what div 1, 2, and 3 were either. So always try to name your classes in such a way that makes sense to folks. Second, be consistent. So one of the things that can be really helpful is if your H1s, let's pretend that this is a 500-page website. If you've got different H1 styles on every one of your pages, that's going to be a nightmare. So make sure your H1s are all pretty much the same size, same font, same color, as much as you can make them consistent among all of your pages when you're designing. Same thing with your paragraphs and things like that. So the third thing is commenting your code. These comments here are in HTML, and I always like to do things like, hey, header starts here in my header. Start my homepage content in my homepage. Start my footer in my footer. That can really help mark up your site, your code, so that your other partner can really understand what chunk of code is what. The other thing that's going to allow you to do is you're going to be able to group things in your CSS. So I'll go over my CSS here real quick. I've also done that. I've also put little comments in my CSS to kind of say, hey, my div styles are in this section, my type styles are in this section. And we kind of did this with our media queries, but I'm taking it to another level by commenting in little sections in my CSS. I like to keep all of my type styles together in one chunk rather than sprinkle it throughout the entire CSS. I like to just kind of group my type styles. I like to group my divs in sections as well, and that allows me, as I'm searching, especially as my CSS gets to be a longer file, I can actually start searching for chunks of information, and that's very helpful for both you and your partner. The fourth thing, and probably the most important thing, is the ability to actually split up your code into two chunks, so you can work on one chunk and the other person can be working on another chunk. So I'll go back to my index. So the first thing that I do is, together as a group, the two of you together, start working on the things that are shared among all your pages. So for instance, your header is probably shared along with your navigation. Is probably shared between all of your pages. I don't care if you got 3, 5, or 100 pages. It's probably very similar or the same. Your footer is also probably the same, for instance. So is there anything that can be used over and over and over again throughout your entire site? Do that together as a group. You also do your style sheet, your normal style sheet. So I've got my normal Myers reset, and then I've got the stuff for all of my shared information, right? So all my H's are going to be the same, my header is going to be the same, my nav, my logo, all that stuff is probably going to be the same and shared. So that's my style.css. Now, I told you at one point that you're really only supposed to have one style sheet, one CSS sheet for the entire website. In this case, you can kind of, I guess, cheat a little bit by creating a new style sheet for each individual page that you need to do. So for instance, I've got a home page and then I've got maybe a secondary page that I need to work on. I can be working on my home page while my partner is working on that secondary page, maybe the shopping cart or something along those lines. So what I can do is I can create a new style sheet just for the shopping cart, but that also shares all of the same CSS from my home page or the shared items from my home page. So style.css will have all of my shared components in there, my header, my footer, and all that stuff from a style perspective. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new style sheet just for my home page that just is going to be for the new stuff that's in the middle part here. So I can go in and I can copy my link to my style sheet. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to hit return and I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to change the href for the style sheet. And I'll call that home.css and save that. So now it's loading up style.css and home.css. So style is going to be anything that's shared. And I would suggest that you make one of you responsible for anything that's shared. So if I was responsible for all the shared CSS, my partner would email me and say, hey, there's a problem with the logo, go fix it, rather than my partner going in and messing things up and fixing something else that might break some of my stuff. So if you designate one person to be kind of the master of the shared stuff, that's the best. Okay, so you code your header, your nav, and your footer together. You've put all that stuff in style.css, and then now I'm going to make a new one called home.css. I'm just going to go to File, New, and I'll call this home.css. Oops. File, save. And I'll call it home.css, and I need to make sure that it's in the same folder here. So site example. And notice that I got my style.css in my folder. I'm also going to save, and that means I'm going to have a home.css in there as well. So go back here. All right. So then let's say I've got my index, and this is my home page, and I've got a new div here that's maybe a little different from anything that's shared. So maybe my article, I got a class of, I don't know, left call. For my left column, I got a paragraph in there. There we go. All right. So that left call doesn't really, let's say that doesn't show up anywhere else. So I'll go to my home screen or my home.css and I'll say, hey, dot left call. And then I can start with whatever I want to. Position, static, width of 25%, and float left, etc. Save that. And then all of my stuff from my home screen or from my shared comes from style.css. Anything new that just pertains to this screen, this page right now, I just put in home.css. So I might have a home.css, I might have a shopping cart.css or cart.css that handles all the cart stuff, but both of them will load style first and then load the second one that you want second. Now, don't forget that CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So let's say, for instance, on my home screen, let's say I shared something. So let's say in my style.css, my nav or my logo is a position static, float left, margin left to 10%, and width to 10%. what happens if I needed to change something that's already existing in my shared stuff, but I need to change it just a little bit. Let's say I need to change the color of a font or a paragraph or something along those lines, or I needed to move something over just for the shopping cart, whatever. You can do that. So let's say logo is the one that I need to change from the home screen to something else. So let's say I want to change the margin left on that from 10% to 5%. I'm not sure why you would do that. This is the header, so you probably wouldn't do it in your own thing, but we're just using it as an example. I could go to home.css and say, hey, I need to change something about the shared CSS on my home screen. I'm going to change that. I'm going to make my class a logo. And if it's the only thing that I need to change, I can just change that one thing. So I'll just change margin left to 5%. So it's pulling logo from my style.css. It's pulling all of this stuff, but then on the home screen, it's overwriting logo with just the one thing that I need to change. So by splitting up your CSS, you can say, hey, person one, you're dealing with the home page plus anything that's shared. Person two, you're going to deal with, let's say, just the shopping cart. So that way, we can split up the CSS that way. Somebody's taking care of the shared stuff and the home screen, and then I'll take care of the shopping cart with my own CSS for those particular pages. That should be it. Have fun, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be on Slack all through the holiday and through the weekend. So if you get stuck on anything or have any questions, just let me know.